Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Dan Knowlton. Dan is the co-founder of Knowlton, a video and social media marketing agency that is bridging the gap between driving trackable results for brands and producing social media content audiences queue up to see. He's also an international keynote speaker and co-host of the Business Anchors podcast. Now, I admit I can be a bit weird sometimes, but I've got nothing on Dan. He's building a massively successful business by wearing ugly wigs, putting on silly voices, and talking about vermin. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Knowlton.
That is the best intro I've ever had. That is amazing. Thank you.
Welcome to the show, Dan.
This is already, I know this is going to be good based on that intro. This is brilliant. Hi, glad to be here.
Just this morning on social media, I was giving you a bit of grief on your haircut, which I said seems slightly, Mark Zuckerberg-y. But I realized that might be because I'm harboring some resentment towards you and your brother Lloyd. And this is two reasons. The first one is that you shared a video of a guy making fun of podcasters who keeps adjusting the boom arm nonstop. And as you can see on the video, the audience can't. I have a boom arm, and now I'm super self-conscious about moving this thing. And the other thing is, every time you talk about your speaking on your podcast, your brother says, international keynote speaker, Dan Knowlton. And I have to say keynote speaker, international keynote speaker all the time when I'm talking about the stuff I do. And now, again, super self-conscious about it.
Don't worry. I mean, I'm used to working with my brother. It's constantly him taking the piss out of me. So, yeah, I'm used to it.
Is that what you meant when you said in a different podcast that you and him are classic brothers?
Yeah, I think so. I think the interesting thing is, growing up together. I don't know if you've got any siblings. Have you got any siblings?
I've got more than I can count.
Okay, so you're constantly sort of poking fun at each other and that kind of thing. We're literally grown adults, and we've just continued to do that through running our business. So yeah, and on our podcast as well.
It's not a bad strategy. I think I've subscribed to the view that growing up is just learning that you shouldn't pick your nose in public, essentially. Apart from that, it's just, I can't do this in front of people, but that's essentially
it. Yeah. I think that one of the best parts is just the amount we laugh whilst working together. That just makes this whole process of running a business so much more enjoyable when you just constantly... He knows how to whisper one thing in my ear that will make me laugh for 10 minutes. It's just, once you grow up with someone, it's good.
Yeah, no, I recognize that. My brother is a director for advertising movies. I don't think we could work together. We have a very good relationship now. It's been a long time since he's chased me around the house with a kitchen knife, but
yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm quite happy having different professions. I think we drive each other up the wall too much, and no work would get done.
Yeah, I get that.
On your podcast, one of the things you guys do all the time is you share professional and business stories. Now, how much of that is planned? So as you go into the episode, you have okay, I'm going to share this story or that story, or does that just come naturally in the way you guys communicate to each other?
That's a really good question. So analyzing it, I'd say it's 70-30. 70% planned, 30% just happens because we've spoken about other things, maybe even 60-40. But we to prep for the podcast, we do agree what we're going to be talking about, but then we each go away ourselves and create bullet points of things that we think will be interesting to talk about. We don't always talk about all of it, but definitely, yeah. So it's about 60 or 70% planning. And then just naturally through talking about things, I always get excited. I'm like, oh, remember this story from our childhood or this time in business when this happened. And I find that the 30 or 40% that we don't prepare for are always come across the best because we both get excited to tell the story. And I think people like to see that kind of, hate to say it, but authentic, storytelling come across.
Well, I love that you use that word because
I hate that word.
Well, yes, you say that, but and I actually, when I was researching the podcast, I came up with that a lot. The fact that you hated, you mentioned on the podcast, and I thought that I would tell you that I was going to name the podcast "Be Authentic to 10x Everything" with Dan Knowlton.
Yes. Oh,
But when I was listening to one of your older interviews, this was 2017, you gave a straight-faced answer that the secret to your social media success was that you were authentic. And I thought, okay, say that you hate it, say that you hate it, say that you hate it. And you just went on about how being authentic was great.
wow. Oh no. I don't ever listen to, like stuff that I did years ago, because I'm sure I'd constantly contradict myself, and it's just cringe, makes you cringe, doesn't it? Listen to yourself, things you were saying, but hey.
Well, it's. I think we can all be. We can, if we go back long enough, we've all said plenty of things that we regret.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the stories you shared on the podcast was about, because you guys are talking about your keynote speaking, and there was a story about a guy. This was Eastern Europe, I think, and it was something to do with porn. So what was that story again?
Oh wow, you're gonna make me tell this story. Okay, I'll tell the shortened version. So this was one of my first international speaking engagements in Bulgaria, and I basically went and stayed in Bulgaria for a few days and did this 3-day event. And after you talk, people come up to the stage, and I'm sure you know this, like, want to ask questions about what you've talked about. And one of them was asking a question, and I said, "Oh, let me show you this on my phone." And I clicked the internet. Me and him were staring at the screen, and it was just porn, which was the most cringy thing that's ever happened. But it's a good story to tell.
I think I can top that a bit.
Oh, please do.
I lived with my father for maybe a year, because my mom and my dad are divorced. So I lived with my dad when I was, I think, 17 or something. And he traveled a lot. Like, he was almost never there. And one day I realized that I could watch porn. So I called the cable company. I pretended to be him, and I authorized the porn channel. And and I had a blast, and no studying got done for a long time. And I only got caught because two of my many brothers would come and stay with my dad for the weekend sometimes. And one day I think he was recording a Disney movie for them or something like that. They were much younger than me. And then I got home, and he was irate, and I was like, "What's happened?" And I was like, "I'm watching the kids are watching this movie, and they come to me and say, 'Dad, what is it?' And there's some like 30 seconds of porn."
Ah, no.
And then flips back to the movie, because surely I went in and I was just browsing, and I was like, "Oh, maybe I want to watch some porn now. Maybe, nah, this is not good."
Oh no.
Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't good. No.
Lloyd actually did a commercial drone license course across a week at this place, and it was like 50-year-old men mainly. And the course teacher, he had the same thing where he got his laptop up, connected it in, and wasn't looking. And in his browser history, it just had all the titles of the videos he was watching. And imagine that happening to you, like doing a presentation and people seeing that.
I mean, I don't know if what's worse is that people realize it's porn, or what kind of porn it might be. Because it might just be, hot.
Standard.
Oh, yeah, standard porn, but it could be some really weird stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we talked enough about porn.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So one of the things you guys talked about when it comes to your speaking is you said that, I think in the beginning you were pretty crap at it, that you couldn't breathe properly or something.
Yes.
And one thing you said is that it only started turning around for you when you started telling stories on stage. So what types of stories did you start talking about on stage? And clearly not the ones we just shared.
Yeah, no, good point. The first kind of stories that I really noticed is different was talking about my journey, rather than, I remember starting out, used to have a slide, "Who am I? I run this company. This is my job title," and like just such rubbish. Whereas I'm trying to think that the exact event actually, It was an event in Ireland called called Social Media Marketing Summit Ireland, and I was talking about Snapchat when Snapchat was a thing. Just talking about the journey I'd gone on from being in a job and learning lots and going to university, and then in my job I just hated my life, and I broke down in this job interview, and I think it was sharing an emotive story. And on stage, I literally said, I had this phone interview that I thought was going to get me out of this horrible job. And then I mucked it up and I broke down and cried and rung my mum and dad. And like sharing that vulnerability of like, and this wasn't strategic by me. It just happened because I thought I'd tell the story. Sharing that, you could tell everyone was sort of drawn in and listening to me, because I was like, I cried and I was upset. And everyone, you can kind of relate to somebody if they're being vulnerable and sharing that emotion. So that was it.
Do you still share that? I've heard that story, right? So I know it's the one about, how you were working very long hours and then you really screwed up the interview after like 3 questions. You just hang up and started crying. We've all done that. Just the other day. But now, so you've done this for a while now. So what types of stories do you tell now when you're on stage?
Looking back to my last big speaking engagement, I mean, they've all completely stopped pretty much because of COVID. But the good old days when I was speaking last year before COVID, I spoke at an event called Digitalium, which is in Romania. It was a really, really cool event. Mark Zuckerberg's sister was speaking there, and I got to have dinner with her and stuff. That's my claim to fame. One of the stories I spoke about was about at the time, my fiance was pregnant. And I told a story. I don't know if you've watched this because you've done loads of research. You might not have seen this story, but at the time, I remember I was researching like how to be a good dad, and that story of me like showing I was nervous and what happens if the baby does this and the baby does that. I talked about that, and I showed a picture of my pregnant fiance, and then I tied that to the remarketing ads that I was seeing and how clever those remarketing ads were and how they made me buy. And some of the really creative content that I was retargeted by with this dad that had, don't know if you've seen, but like a front strap where you strap a baby to the front of you. There was a really clever video where it was a dad dancing with the baby, and that video.
I haven't seen that video, but I think I have scars on my chest from having worn that thing for about 5 hours a day for the last 4 years or something.
Exactly, and that story tied into me buying something because of what I was searching for based on a need I had, and then being retargeted with clever content. That's another type of story.
Yeah, because that to me makes complete sense. And this is the one thing that when I'm talking to people about using stories in any type of presentation, or when I'm thinking about what stories I can use when I speak, there is always that danger of, well, the story is great, I'm just going to get it in there, people will laugh, but it has nothing to do with my content. Like, I'm just telling it because I want them to like me.
Yeah, I think now planning talks, I always try and do the latter that you just spoke about, of making it strategic. Like, because I know that stories work and it makes people listen, how can I tie a story into what I'm actually talking about that's going to make this interesting? And we do this a lot in the podcast as well, Business Anchors podcast. When we're talking about, let's say, sales as a topic, we'll talk about the time that we went to a pitch that we didn't realize was a pitch because we were so naive and didn't know what we were doing. And that like taps into the lesson of, making sure you're fully prepared and know what the expectations are, managing expectations. So everything now tries to tie in, but I'm certainly guilty of just telling random stupid stories because I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes when you have a really good one, but you can do it both ways, right? You can say, okay, I want to talk about preparation. When was I not prepared at all? And that you can always get so this is what I'm going to talk about. Find a story professionally or personally where that didn't happen at all, or when I learned that thing is important. But you can also do the opposite, right? You get the cool story. I mean, I'm sure you can get the porn story we talked about and find a lesson in there somewhere. I mean, maybe it's a preparation lesson, maybe it's how professional you come across or whatever. Perhaps an extreme example of that type of thing. But if you have a really cool story, sometimes I have them and I'm like, but what does it mean? Doesn't always work, but
yeah. I think you also, once you do quite a few speaking engagements, I'm sure you found this, you try and test different stories, and you find some of the ones that you think are the best stories ever don't get a great response. And then others that also, something else I found in Eastern Europe, because I've done quite a lot of speaking in Eastern Europe, is the way, like, the cultures are different. So some people are very stern, and something that if I was speaking to like a British audience and I'd be using slang and like, oh, I remember at school when this happened, I have to now try and think what will this audience and culture understand? Because I've totally said not jokes, but like stories that I land with a UK audience and then they just don't get. So it's trying to really get that culture as well, that cultural fit.
100% I agree. And there are certain things I think both of us do, which is self-deprecating humor, that if we ever speak in Asia, that's not going to work. You're not supposed to crap on yourself in front of particularly like a Japanese audience. They won't see that as a good thing. They won't see that as vulnerability. They'll see that as, so you're a moron then. Why should they trust you? But I think this is an interesting lead into how you guys handle your own marketing, not the stuff you do for your clients, but for yourself. And for anyone who hasn't watched this, I very strongly recommend they do. There's plenty of these videos on LinkedIn. I might put some on the show notes. But I came across you, I think the same way a lot of people did, is when you started with the wigs. When did you think, okay, I know how we're going to market ourselves, wigs?
It's one of those things that naturally sort of came about. So up until we started 6 years ago, and we tried producing loads of different content. Some of it worked slightly, but not really. It took us ages to figure out what we can do that's going to get traction. In 2017, we tried this new concept. We basically wanted to share testimonials, our client testimonials. We went and shot a video of them saying nice things about us. But we knew that sharing a video of that is super boring. Like, who wants to watch people saying, yeah, Dan and Lloyd are great from Knowlton? So what we did was we thought of a creative idea to dress up as different characters, pretending to be our own customers, that we talk, like, say funny things, and to show the different characters we wore wigs. That was the first video. That went mental for us. We had like thousands of views on Facebook, which at the time for us was like viral. Thousands of views and like 50 comments. Oh my God, we've actually,
You made it.
Yeah, we've made it. We're like, wow. And then that was really the first point of like, wow, we can actually do something a bit more creative and it works. And then we tried lots of different things. And then I think it was even like a year ago on LinkedIn, we tried something similar with characters, different wigs, doing different sketches that marketing teams would relate to. And it completely landed and directly generated business. Like instantly we got messages saying, I've seen this, I want to talk to you about working with you. And that then it's kind of spiraled from there. But the problem is, what happened after that was everyone that sees our content just thinks we make stupid videos with wigs. So when we've got big credible brands that potentially could work with us that aren't funny and entertaining, they think they can't work with us because we just produce funny videos, which isn't true.
I guess that's one of those problems that if you haven't completely solved already, you should be able to solve very quickly, because once you have a few case studies, then you say, yeah, this is what we do to market ourselves. So you get a feel for how working with us is and how creative we are. This is not the work we do for our clients. Although, how funny would it be if a big client comes to you and you come back to them and say, okay, so we have this idea. Lloyd and I are going to wear some wigs and we're going to do the same thing we normally do, but your product's going to be on the table.
I'll tell you what's interesting. This month, we literally converted a fairly small client. It's not like a big company, a recruitment company that we're doing that for, that came to us and said, we want you, us to be in it, but we want you and Lloyd to play characters in it. And we were like, yeah, let's do it. So, but we did have a whole strategy around properly communicating that we don't just make stupid, funny videos. And it's really worked because there's been a whole creative strategy we've had to do that. So
this is something that I don't actually think is this a real problem, or is this a problem you thought you might have?
Okay, I'll give you evidence as to why it was an actual problem. So a guy I know through business networks where I am locally for the last few years, gives me a phone call around, like, so let's say a year ago. And he says, I was speaking to the founder of this big business park. And he was saying, I was saying to him, you've got to see what Knowlton are doing. They're local to you. You should work with them to create videos and stuff. And this big, high profile, big cheese guy who's like, got a lot of credibility and influence, says to him, I've seen what they do. I'm connected with them on LinkedIn, but we're not funny, so we wouldn't work with them. that he called me and told me this, and that was the first moment I looked back at all of our LinkedIn content and I was like, wow, we do actually come across that we're, getting great traction and stuff with some people, but we can do a lot more than just producing funny content that drives sales. So then that was the evidence that we needed to then, maybe I thought it was a bigger problem than it was, but
yeah, because I say that because there's some other people on LinkedIn that have very particular personal brands. So I'm thinking of a guy I had on the podcast before, Alex B. Sheridan, and he's in many of his videos he's playing characters, he's rapping. It's the type of thing you wouldn't think is necessarily very corporate. But speaking to him, he says it's very clear to the people that he speaks to. He says, no, this is just me. This is how I express myself creatively. That's not how you would do it. Like, he says that I don't teach my clients to rap so they can imitate exactly what I'm doing. They just, this is my thing. Your thing might be completely different. But the other side of that is looking at some of the case studies you've done. They're perhaps not as weird from a sense of humor point of view than some of the stuff you guys do on LinkedIn. But having said that, I mean, they're still funny or they're still like whimsical. So that's the thing that you guys do more naturally. And some clients won't like that, but there's plenty of clients who will.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. A lot of the best case studies we share with the world are the ones that allow us to have creative freedom, because we know through our own experience, entertaining content gets people to watch it. And when people watch something that's created in a way to drive a sale and you can keep them watching, that's a great piece of marketing collateral. So the companies that allow us to have creative, I mean, sometimes we do pitch really out there ideas. Like the recent client we've just started, the campaign's launched by Whole Foods Online. It's like a Whole Foods company, and the campaign's killing it now. But I remember the concepts we pitched. They're basically a very ethical green company, and we pitched ideas like punching dolphins in heads on the video to like as a kind of, this is what we're not like. And obviously, like looking back, it was quite out there. We eventually got to concepts that are in line with their brand a lot more.
Didn't you pitch blowing up stuff?
Blowing up a shed, yeah, we wanted to blow up a shed, and then they sort of said, well, we kind of don't want to show that we're wasting material and blowing up stuff. And we're like, yeah, that's kind of fair enough.
But you still built that into the commercial, right? Because there's a guy who keeps wanting to blow up a shed, and the sort of the Whole Foods person says, no, you can't blow up a shed.
Exactly, to keep people watching. But the most excited projects I get most excited about working on are the ones where the brand is like, we totally get you and what you do whatever you want to drive the most sales and the best return on investment. That is like gold dust to us. Whereas I'd say at least 60, 70% of the brands that approach us, especially the bigger, more global brands now, there's a lot of red tape around what they feel they can and can't do. They don't want to piss people off or offend people. So, and we still produce, emotive campaigns that drive that in a more formal, less funny way. But yeah, I just love working on the stuff where we can just do crazy shit that's really fun to talk about and drives really good results.
Just to sort of wrap up the part about the way you guys promote yourselves, do you notice a difference when you just made up some stories so you can act against each other, or when you're actually just playing a real situation but in a funnier way? Do you notice any real difference there? Because the testimonial stuff to me seems to be a very good example of using like a real thing but in a funny way, other than just inventing stuff.
Do you mean with our own content in terms of some things like a sketch we just make up, and other things are like, here's a case study?
Yeah, with your own content.
So yeah, the difference is the sketch stuff where we're producing funny content is great awareness content, drives way more views, way more engagement, way more people saying, wow, I love this is amazing. The more serious content, which is like middle of funnel consideration content, case studies, showing results, that way less people are like, oh, this is amazing. But they're the pieces of content that we get messages saying, I've seen these results, I want to set up a call. Like just from posting the results of this campaign we're doing in January, I've got like 4 calls booked in with companies who are like, wow, those results are insane. We've seen what you're doing. Let's have a call. So we need a mixture of all of them, because the cool, creative, fun, made up stuff draws the audience in. And then once they like us or they've seen what we're doing, then we can reinforce that trust with, we're actually good at getting a trackable return on investment.
Right, so I've seen you talk about this before. So you talked about the funnel and what types of stories work for different parts of the funnel. So if I'm getting you, the first thing you just said now is all the crazy nonsensical stuff Is the first part of the funnel. It's just awareness. Okay, well, these guys exist. I can see what they're doing. That's what you use that sort of stuff for, right?
That's one example of awareness, but yeah.
What would be another?
Educational content. The first 4 years of us starting, we didn't produce any funny content. It was purely, here's something we've learned to do with growing a social audience growing audience on Twitter, using this tool to schedule stuff. We'd learn something, then create a tutorial. That was the kind of top of funnel stuff to draw people in, teaching them how to do something that we've got evidence generates a tangible result. Other things are educational, entertaining, stuff to talking about our story and our journey. We started from here. This is where we are now. We tend to do less of that, but that I'd class that as kind of mainly top of funnel content. So yeah, they're kind of the three main types of content.
Okay. And then the middle of the funnel stuff would be what exactly?
Would be anything. If you think about when people are buying into you, what are all the questions they need answering? What are all the things they need to see to know that you're the best solution to their problem and they can trust you to deliver on your promises? So for example, case studies showing the results you've achieved, talking about credible brands you've worked with, awards, accreditations, things that demonstrate that you invest a lot in the work you do. So like showing all of the great equipment we've invested tens of thousands of pounds into produce content for our clients. So they know, they're not just turning up with a smartphone and trying to shoot our content. Objection overcoming content. So for example, are Knowlton too expensive to work with? Are we the right company for Knowlton? All of these questions, we create content to say, hey, if you're XYZ type of company, we're ideal for you. It's those kind of things.
Okay. And then is there a third part to that funnel?
The third part is we call it the purchase stage, which is you've made someone aware of you, they trust you, you've overcome all their objections, but that's not good enough. There's plenty of people that know us and trust us, but they haven't got in touch with us. So it's doing all the things we need to do to nudge them to get in touch with us. So having consistent call to actions across everything we do, on our website, making it easy for people to get in touch with us, being prompt when they follow up with us, having an effective sales process and a way of managing that sales process. We use HubSpot's sales and CRM system. So yeah, those kind of things.
So we talked about one of the things that I wanted to cover, but there's a few questions I still want to ask about this challenge with tone, right? Because so I watched the commercials, I watched the Whole Foods commercials, and I watched the Wall commercials, which I think are the case studies you have up on the website. What I find challenging to understand is, so a company has watched all this stuff you've done. You presume they watch some of the stuff you've done when they're approaching you. How much of do you have to start a conversation about, okay, well, do you see what we normally like? Is that what you're looking for? And if the answer is no, I mean, are they just working on the basis that, okay, these guys are good, surely they have a completely different gear than the stuff that I'm normally seeing?
Yeah, good question. So we do share other things that aren't just our best, most exciting, fun, entertaining content that shows that we produce more corporate content. So some of them see that as a point to know, they do other stuff, and we talk about that. But the main part of the sales process where we're gathering this information is when we set up that discovery call and we're asking the questions of, what are you trying to achieve? What are you looking for? How do you define your brand? What's your tone of voice? And we ask those questions. And if they're saying we're a very serious brand, there's lots of red tape, needs to be very corporate, I'm taking this all in as part of the sales process, and I'm saying, great, we've done serious stuff with this kind of brand, so we've done that, great, this is interesting. Then we'll go away and develop a pitch that's based on the information they've provided. So it's asking those right questions at the start of the sales process to really gauge that. And when we started out doing this, I was rubbish at this. It's taking a lot of failed attempts at this to get to where we are now, and I've still got a long way to go. So it's constantly trying to fine-tune and get better.
Now, when it comes to the ad work you guys are doing for clients, I've seen you talk about emotion and the role of emotion in advertising, and you quoted or you mentioned the Christmas commercials that are massive. They're massive in many countries. In Brazil, for example, they're very big, but in the UK, they're a very long-standing institution, right?
Yeah,
I remember a few from when I was there for 5 years. But those are very different types of commercials, right?
Yeah. The way I like to think of it is like the Super Bowl commercial, the Christmas ad. Have you seen like the John Lewis ad, the Sainsbury's ad? Yeah. So in Brazil, do they not have this whole thing around Christmas commercials?
We do. So what happens is What I'm thinking of is there's one major supermarket brand in the south of Brazil called Zafari, and let's think of them as John Lewis. And every single year there is the Zafari Christmas commercial, and it's very similar in style. It's something that has nothing to do with the brand, like it's nothing to do with the supermarket. We know it's a Zafari commercial, and then it's a story. It's always this sort of emotional stuff to, get the feel good factor about the brand higher. And I've seen plenty of those internationally. I actually shared one on social media not long ago where it's this grandfather, and he looks at a picture. You don't know what the picture is of whom, and then he goes into his shed, and it's a mess. And then you've seen it one, right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, he's doing the kettlebell. So he's training with a kettlebell, and at the end of the day, he's training so he can lift his granddaughter to put the star on the Christmas tree. Then my question would be, why could you not make most commercials like that, where there's no brand, nothing specific about the brand? Is more like, okay, I love this brand, and what I feel like when I think about them. Why can that not be what people do a lot?
I'll tell you why. Because you're never going to nudge someone who's thinking, oh, this is nice, to buying a specific product or taking a specific action. To get someone to actually take action, buy a product, they need to understand the brand. They need to see the brand. So this type of Christmas ad is incredible because, these companies have created a category of advert that people actually get excited to watch. And that's a completely crazy concept when you think of like traditional TV ads, disruptive advertising, like, oh, another pop-up ad. Oh, there's a TV ad. Let's skip this. Now they've created a category of advert where people literally schedule time to see, oh, the John Lewis ad is live. I've got to see that. How crazy is that? It's like Netflix. It's like creating something that people get excited to watch. So it's incredible in that sense. And everyone's talking about the John Lewis ad. But what everyone isn't talking about is the new microwave that's being sold through John Lewis that's going to help solve my problems. So that category of advert has a great place in terms of building that awareness, getting people talking about a brand. But that's where all the other content that links back to that marketing funnel I mentioned is crucial to have. Because if you just had that John Lewis advert, millions of people will be talking about it. No one would be going to the John Lewis site to buy products. No one would be going to the John Lewis store to buy products because their hand hasn't been held through that customer journey of realizing what problems John Lewis can solve, realizing you have those problems, realizing they've got the best solutions to that problem, and then actually taking action. So you need all that other content to make this work, rather than just the amount of marketing companies I see, and we used to do this, saying to their customers, we can help build awareness for you. Of course, anyone can build awareness. You can shout in the street. We do marketing, that builds awareness, but actually converting that awareness into trackable sales and ROI is the challenging part. The easy part is building awareness.
I think it's interesting that you say that they've created this type of advertising, because in the one sense, you're 100% right. They have created this type of advertising. At the same time, they haven't really created anything. It's just 2 minutes of storytelling. It's just because we've gone so far from the idea of people telling stories just for the sake of telling stories. Because, when's the last time that you sat next to a mate or a relative and thought, oh, they have this story that I want to tell you. And you're like, oh, I love his stories. I'm just going to sit here and listen. Now, if you organically do as a mate, you don't know what happened to me yesterday, you listen. But this concept of, my grandfather is a great storyteller. Every time he sits me down for a story, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know what it is. It's probably just going to be entertainment. I might not learn anything, but I just want to listen to this. And that, I think, ties as well with what we said in the beginning, where I'm not saying that your story about your interview that failed was a story that had no purpose whatsoever. That story shows you as an approachable human being. But at the same time, that story is not going to lead anyone to any type of action. Apart from you're not an asshole, when I thought maybe you were, okay, fine, I covered that objection, but you don't do anything after that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I also think, and again, you may have heard me say about this before, but the TED Talks book, Chris Anderson's book, TED Talks, the one massive takeaway I got from that is that whenever you're speaking on stage or you're engaging with anyone, they have their wall up. They're thinking, first of all, they're like, I'm not letting your ideas into my brain because I don't know you like you trust you. And then you have to somehow break down that wall. One of the approaches they talk about for breaking down that wall is showing vulnerability, is showing that you're not I'm the best at marketing, I can help you. You're actually saying, here's how I'm not the best. And then people start to open that wall up. So I think that kind of storytelling does have a place to break down barriers, to let let you into their mind with your ideas. But I think you're even making me think now I need to be way more strategic about the stories I tell, because previously this has all just happened because I've just fumbled my way to getting into speaking and stuff. And now I need to think more strategically like you.
If it's not broken, don't fix it. But at the same time, there's this saying which some people disagree, and I disagree at times, which is don't tell a story without a point, and don't make a point without a story.
Yeah, I like that.
When it comes to the walls you were talking about, I have seen people describe this as that most people push information out. So you're giving them your opinions, you making statements about marketing or whatever you're talking about. Whereas a story is not a push strategy, it's a pull strategy. So you tell us something that happened to you. There's no agreeing or disagreeing. I might disagree with your conclusion about what happened to you, but you've now given me this experience, and I'm going to go, yeah, I actually lived something similar to that. Okay, yeah, I can see how that would work. You're putting it out there, and it's for people to pick it up or not. It's different than saying, no, you have to do this, you have to do that.
Yeah. It's weird how crazily people respond more and to stories when you're speaking, like when you're just, because I totally have just done the sharing information on stage and everyone's sort of there yawning, looking at their phone. When you say, oh, this thing happened to me the other day, I've got to tell you about this, everyone's like that on their seat, like leaning forward, like I need to hear this. It's interesting. There must be science behind something that's going on with, I think in the book, actually, Chris Anderson's book talks about how when you describe a situation, something to do with the brain receptors in the audience is like you kind of match up somehow. I'm not an expert, but
I am. Yeah, so he's quoting Uri Hassan, who is a guy who did a lot of brain imagery studies. And essentially what they found is that when we start telling a story, the brain waves of the storyteller and the audience are very different to begin with. But as the story goes on, those brain waves align. And he calls that alignment or coupling. It's one of the two. So the idea is that once they're aligned, information is flowing a lot more freely. So whatever I'm trying to get across to you is getting there more easily. And a couple of episodes ago, I had Paul Zak on the podcast, and he's one of the scientists that does all the hormonal stuff about oxytocin, which is the trust hormone and all of this stuff. He essentially found out about that. And he told me about the Super Bowl commercials that you and I sort of talked about on social media. So what that is this. So people love Super Bowl commercials. They're a massive thing in the US, and they cost an absolute fortune. So what he wanted to find out is he developed a ranking criteria to judge if a story was good or not. And he wanted to check how accurate that criteria was for judging things like, do people like the story? Does it predict sales bumps for the product? So what he did was, as a comparison, he used the Super Bowl commercials. So they are ranked. I don't know who exactly, but someone ranks them in order of preference by the audience. So he got the commercials, ran them through his software, and found that his criteria was completely different than what people were saying they liked. But then he did the same experiments, actually checking people's neural reactions, and he found that the brain agreed with his criteria, not with what people had said they liked. So what you're saying you liked from a commercial you just watched is not what your brain is thinking. And that doesn't translate necessarily to anything that a company would want. It doesn't mean that you're going to sell more. And his theory behind that is because, if you're watching a commercial that has babies in it or has puppies or whatever, right? You're going to like those commercials. They're nice. They're funny. But they don't have a narrative arc. There's not much tension in them. So there's not a climax of any kind. They're just nice. So that doesn't really do what a story is supposed to do. And if it doesn't do what a story is supposed to do, you don't remember it as well. And it's less likely to drive you to action.
Wow. That's so interesting. I actually am reading a book currently called Spin Selling, and they talk about this point of people saying the reason for success in some area and that being complete BS. Like they said, they studied 30,000 of the top salespeople in the world who said, yeah, the art of selling is down to doing this and that. And when they actually analyzed their behavior, it was nothing to do with that. It was something that they hadn't even said. So it's so interesting that we think like we're giving advice on, yeah, this is why this is successful, but maybe it's all wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion between cause and effect. Why you did that, and we tell ourselves stories about things we do all the time, and you think, I behave this way because of this, and it might have nothing to do with that. It might be completely random, and no story is more random than the one where you tell yourself of who you are. It's like, I'm doing this now because when I was a kid, this and that happened. Maybe it has nothing to do with it, but you're just trying to find some sort of, is it just random? Someone said, Dan, you should go into marketing. Oh, okay, I'll go into marketing then. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. I think I've seen some speakers though, that you can so tell that they're doing that and they've made up like, oh, when I was a kid, I once sold candy bars at school. And from that day I think it's quite easy to tell a really authentic kind of story that actually happened when someone's telling it to like someone that's fabricated a story to sound good as part of a speech. I guess unless they're really good at storytelling and they've practiced it. I don't know what you think.
Yes, 100% it happens. People will try to come up with the origin story that makes perfect sense. But often it's just nonsense, and it's not needed, because some of the best stories you have, they're not about what actually happened and how impressive what happened is. They are about how you read what happened. So I've told the story before. I don't know if I told it on the podcast, but my daughter, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she's obsessed with Frozen. A few weeks ago, she woke up in the middle of the night and said she was scared or something, and she wouldn't go back to sleep. Nothing I could say to her convinced her to go back to sleep. And I reasoned with the best of my abilities, you have school tomorrow, you're going to be tired. No, then I started sort of threatening her. And then at some point I said, listen, you're not going to watch Frozen ever again if you don't go back to bed. And that didn't get me anywhere. And then I was so tired and so frustrated that I broke down crying, like I was sobbing like a child. And that got through. She was like, don't be like that, please. I'll go back to bed right now. I've used that story as an example of why emotion beats reason every time. Emotion decides and reason justifies. And it's a perfectly decent example of that type of reasoning. I can also use one that I have used, which is, the Syrian refugee crisis, and how we only cared about it when we saw the picture of the little boy. They both do the same job. One of them is more powerful. In some scenarios, you might need that bigger one. But I think people get this idea that if I haven't always lived in a way that makes me the expert now, then I should be up on the stage. No, just find a funny story that happened when you went to McDonald's. And if you can make that work with the content, then that's fine.
Yeah. I find I can relate most to someone when they're saying things that seemingly make it sort of discredit them. Like the people that say, there's the, I sold candy at school and now I'm a really good entrepreneur. Or the people that are like, for the first 20 years of my life, I did absolutely nothing and ate McDonald's every day. And then randomly I thought I'd do this and that. And that's more like relatable, isn't it, than the traditional...
You're talking about Lloyd again.
Yeah. That is literally Lloyd's story.
All right. So one final thing I wanted to ask you about your approach to ad work and telling stories for clients. And this is something I honestly have no idea what the answer is. Now, I watched the Whole Foods commercial. So what you have in your website, I'm assuming, is a whole bunch of pieces one next to each other. It's not a 5-minute commercial. What I found really interesting there is it's obviously a recurring story. So you have the same sort of 3 or 4, has the blonde woman, which is sort of the spokesperson. There is the weird secretary that you push off a plane, I think Janet. Great name for a secretary.
Yeah.
The supposedly good-looking bloke that wants to blow up stuff and whatever. And this is my question. How do you build in a story that only really works to its full extent once you watch the previous stuff? How confident do you have to be that people will have watched them so that you can build on that story? I don't know which connects to what, but there's one where the woman gets pushed off the airplane, and then the next one they're on the beach and she's just on the water covered in plastic.
So good question. And the way we kind of combat that is the only video we've shown is the case study, is the one full-length 5-minute video showing the whole. There's actually another 50 plus pieces of creative we shot and edited separately that stand alone. They overcome objections. They communicate benefits of buying from the thing, that they communicate offers and things. So I guess we've made it so that we produce this full length video that we know that the people that watch that full video are the real fans that are fully into this. And we know that we can remarket to those and make them spend more money. However, we also know that 80% of people, 90% of people won't do that. They'll watch a small part of it. They'll get a bit of the vibe. And then we can remarket them with the other 50 pieces of creative that are most relevant to them, depending on what they've seen. So it's a good question. We don't rely on people seeing that full story to get everything else. We combat that by creating loads of other pieces of creative that work standalone to deliver the same result, if that makes sense.
So what you're not doing, which perhaps I misunderstood that, but what I thought you perhaps were doing is to say, okay, so this is really 4 or 5 different things. We can cut them up as 5 individual ones. You play one, you circulate one of them, and then a few weeks later, you start putting out the second one, because perhaps, I don't watch much TV these days and don't spend that much time on social media. So I was thinking of TV commercials, because that used to be done occasionally over the years with popular brands. They had the same characters and they just kept coming back. So is that not how you guys use that?
So good. We do both. That video you saw, there are 8 versions of that video. Shorter versions, square versions with elements cut out that still make sense. So we do, in a way, and we also, for remarketing content, have some segments of that main video that communicate clear benefits or overcome objections as standalone pieces. But you're exactly right. It has to be thought out before you shoot anything to know that segment that would make sense standalone, we can use as a separate clip. But this bit, you need to get the full story to be able to cut it. So we won't cut that as a separate clip. So it's a case of cutting the relevant segments of the full video out to use as for other creative, but also having 50 other pieces of creative that work standalone. So it was both.
It's interesting to try and apply that to speaking, to the stage, because I know speakers that have like a very, very long story that they can cut in smaller pieces. So maybe, you have your journey story, and your journey story has that initial piece with the failed interview, and then the bit that comes right next to it, you're not going to tell at that point. You're going to tell 10 minutes into the speech, and then it's just another 2-minute bit, but it builds on the previous one. So when you're getting to the end of that, you're just getting all those callbacks. And if something was funny earlier, it should be a lot funnier by the end. But there's no way you would have told that as a 25-minute story.
Yeah, some of the best speakers I've seen have done that in a very clever way. What you've just said, and I guess it's because you're an expert in this, it's like telling one story that's broken up across the whole talk, but you're bringing back and like, remember when I said that, and it ties it all together. Yeah, it's all making sense now.
It's like with the vermin mention, which is, I probably should have explained this earlier. At some point, you guys told a story about worst business advice you ever gotten, and your dad said that people shouldn't eat at their desks because vermin. And, so I watched that comes up a few times in the episode, but you've done it in different episodes. So someone who's listened to that, perhaps for the next year, why do you keep saying vermin?
Yeah.
Over and over again. And it's building on that previous story.
It's done unknowingly, though. I think the reason you're really good at this, you're an expert, is because you would do this proactively and plan this out. Like us, that's just randomly happened without planning it. So this is why I'm thinking, wow, I need to be doing this in a more constructive way from now.
But it's done naturally, we could say, because it works, because it's such a good story with such a good sort of punchline that it just keeps coming back to you over and over. It's like when I grew up watching a lot of Seinfeld and Friends, and now I've weaned myself off of doing that. But for many years, my friends and I would just say lines from the shows. We still say stuff like "Serenity Now," or "Pivot." Now this is last year more than you pivot.
Yeah, classic Friends episode.
Yeah, we were on a break. You just say stuff like that because it just stuck in your brain so much, and it keeps getting, it gets funnier and funnier and funnier the more you do it. But yeah, I think you put a bit more thought into it when this is pretty much all you're doing, because this is not all you do. And speaking is a part of what you do, is not all you do. But that's one of those things that if you can build on those initial stories, then the whole thing just feels rounder. Also, if you can finish with something you had at the beginning, that always works really well.
Feels like a nicer ending, doesn't it? Then you're like, oh wow, it's all come together for this one point. Yeah.
And a lot of movies and books do this all the time. So books will typically open with a scene that is, if not the end, close to the end, and then they'll take you back to where they were. There's the Breaking Bad first episode starts with him half naked with a gun in the desert, and then that only happens at the very end of that first season. But then you go, oh, right, and I can see how we got there.
Yeah.
Then this has been fantastic, mate. Now, we talked about LinkedIn plenty of, so people know to look for you there. But if you want them to find out more of your real work and not just the wigs, where should they go?
Yeah, cool. Our website, knowltonmarketing.co.uk, is where all our case studies and loads more info, showreel and stuff is there. So.
Oh, and I must say that I think it's a big shame that you didn't stick with your probably fictitious first name for the company, Dan. Here's Dan calling from Dan.
Yeah, Lloyd didn't want to go with that, so we went with Knowlton.
Yes, I can see how the other Knowlton who's not called Dan might not appreciate working for Dan at Dan.
Yeah, I think there's a bit too many Dans. This has been really good, by the way. This has probably been one of my most fun podcasts because of the amount of prep you've done for this. I'm learning from what you've done in this podcast for us when we do interviews. So this has been a lesson for me. So thanks.
Well, then perhaps I should spend some time some other day picking your brain on how to, the marketing side of it, because you guys have done a much better job at the marketing. Where there I completely suck. But yeah, no, it's it's been great. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. And until next time. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a review or a rating on the Apple Podcasts app. It's very easy. You open the app and find this show. Then scroll down a little, and when you see the stars, tap. I'd really appreciate it, and it does help other people find us. And if you'd like to get in touch or find out more about what I do, reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit my website, storypowers.com.